Hey everyone, Sam here from the Action Point. Last weekend had a really good event on, the Australian National Championships. And yeah, just here to give you a quick update, essentially how we did, what went well, etc. Um, Little spoiler, got the trophy right here. So I'll give you a quick update on my current list, how I went in the event overall, how the draft rounds went, etc., etc., and especially how the top cut turned out. So, first up, the list. The list that I've been playing hasn't changed that much whatsoever since my previous events. The main thing is in the sideboard. In Auckland, I was running 3 chamber, 3 purifier, and 8 D-reacts. And currently I'm on only 2 chamber and 7 D-reacts. So first off, the 2 chambers. The reason I'm only on 2 is because you don't really need the third. The third one is purely just like a safety net in case you lose it either through boosting or someone playing a smashing good time against you or an assassin banishing it off one of their contract cards. But yeah, realistically, you only need the 2 of. The third one is just in case you lose it somehow. Secondly, the D-React I've chosen to get rid of is Reinforce the Line. Reinforce the Line is really good to get around Dominate and to be playable against CNC, that sort of thing. But I've found with my current list, with 8 non-attacks in 3 Spark of Genius, 3 High Octane, and 2 Bias Update, there is a chance you draw a hand where Reinforce the Line is not playable, just because you don't have that attack action card to trigger it on. So that's why I've chosen, out of all the D-Reacts to get rid of, I've chosen to get rid of Reinforce the Line, just one of those. I still really enjoy the card, having 2 of them is great, but yeah, just not on the 3 of those at the moment. The other thing is, the reason I've chosen to get rid of part of the pistol package and the D-Reacts is because the main matchup we use those for is Oldhim. With Oldhim leaving the meta due to his Living Legend status, I've felt like the other control matchups, you would still ideally have as many D-Reacts as possible, but it doesn't feel like these are cards that you super need against them. Having 7 is more than enough. So that's why I've decided to just run those. And with those 2 slots opened up, I've decided to put in payloads. And this was really the impetus behind me wanting to change the list. Is these payloads are in the list because they're 6 powers, they're poppers into Dromai. And Dromai is A, one of the hardest matchups you can face as a Dash player. And B, I have a lot of them in my locals, and all of them are very skilled. So I sort of made the meta call that Dromai was going to be a really big feature at this event, just because of how many play in my locals, how well her results have been in recent events, etc., etc. So I just thought I would put these in the list in exchange for some of the pistol package. So I side these in against Dromai, and also against control matchups such as Bravo, that sort of thing. And the reason I play it in a control matchup is very simple. It's just, ideally you're just going to be blocking with it because it blocks 3 like all the other cards in the deck. But if you're left with a hand, it's a really nice mid-range play. Just play out a 2 for 6. And it's also a target for your Goliath Gauntlet because we don't run any other arm piece. So having a 2 for 6 that you can play is really good, just to be able to get that +2 damage somewhere throughout the game. So yeah, that's what that's for. Now I'll go into how the Dromai matchup works. So, Dromai. I'm just going to edit our sideboard here just so you have a good idea of what we're trying to do. So first off, the equipment. We aren't going to be running Arcane Barrier into Dromai, so we'll pop the Visiatronic model away. Otherwise, it's all as we expect. Going through the equipment, we have the Achilles Accelerator, what you're really aiming to do with this card is you're going to be using it for either an extra +4 or +5 pistol shot at the end of a chain, because in this matchup you're going to be playing out some purifiers and powering up your pistol with those. So Achilles Accelerator, really good for that. The other good use is, like in any other matchup, drawing a card off Spark and not having a way of playing it. Using the Achilles Accelerator, if the card drawn off Spark is worth it for using that action point for, you can totally do that as well. Next, Crown of Providence, really important card. Means you can put stuff in your arsenal you ideally wouldn't otherwise be. That's the first main thing about it. The second thing about Crown of Providence is that it is really important as just one of those extra block points on some of the really important 4 attacks that Dromai throws at you. Examples of these are obviously Kyloria, stealing an item, you just are forced to block that. Next up, Snatch. It's important to some extent to block Snatch. You really don't want that on hit to happen, but again, Dromai has a lot of 4-powered attacks, and you're not going to be able to block all of them, and I think out of all of them, Snatch is the weakest. That being said, can be worth it to block that Snatch. Dust Up. Dust Up creates an Ash and then allows you to transform this Ash into an Ashwing on hit. Ashwings are, contrary to popular belief, quite difficult to deal with sometimes, especially if there are also other dragons on board. So depending on how the game's going, you often will want to be able to block Dust Up. So again, just Crown of Providence and again Teklo Foundry Heart for those 3 breakpoints you get across those, with 1 lot of 2 block here and a 2 block and a 1 block on the Foundry Heart. Sometimes you'll just throw Crown with the Foundry for a 4 block, but you have to be very careful of the amount of threats left in the Dromai's deck when you do that. Because if you run into a Kyloria while you don't have any block left, it's pretty tough. Ideally, in this matchup, you'd run Galvanic Bender just for another block of some breakpoints. However, I don't run it in my list, and I think Goliath Gauntlet does a good job as well. I think Galvanic would improve the matchup, but that being said, I really like what Goliath does. So the key thing about Goliath is it allows you to get rid of a 6 health dragon, and when I say 6 health, I mean something like Uvia, which does have 6 health, Yenderai, which has 3 health and an endurance counter, which blocks 3, and Necria, which has 7 health, but gets a -1 defense token on it once it's attacked. So if you have Goliath Gauntlet in combination with a Combustible Courier, those together allow you to get rid of a 6 health dragon without having to expend one of your poppers on the offensive. And it also generates the on-hit effect of Combustible Courier to power up the next attack on the chain. So a common playline might be pitch a blue, you're going to Goliath, pitch a blue, play a Combustible Courier into, say, an Uvia, trigger the hit effect, and then you're going to play 0 to 60, this one targeting face. So 0 to 60 would target Dromai for 7, and this is a really good play to both clear the board, threaten damage so they're not allowed to take control of the board without defending, and then finish off by shooting an Ashwing or a Chromai or something with pistol at the end of the chain. So that's really the use case for Goliath Gauntlet. In the end game, often you might just want to crack it to present more damage. But yeah, always remember, cost 2 or greater is what it says on there, so you need to be able to have the target for it. Next in the list, we'll run 2 BIOS update. In this matchup, I'll go through exactly what our game plan is first. So we're going to be starting with our induction chamber. So that's going to be our starting item. Put one of those in the deck. The purpose of induction chamber is in order to deal with multiple dragons without losing cards from our deck. So with an induction chamber, we can shoot an Ashwing, react with Go again, and then shoot another Ashwing, which deals with 2/3 of a Rake the Embers, which is really important sometimes. You can also shoot a Dromai or a Kyloria with the pistol shot. Pistol shot for 2 will deal with those 2 health dragons, and those 2 dragons are some of the strongest in this deck, against our deck specifically, so we want to be able to deal with that. So that's why we start Induction Chamber. I've also found that playing out an Induction Chamber specifically doesn't net us a whole lot of value outside of the initial Induction Chamber that starts on the field, because all it does is allow us to attack with pistol one more time at the cost of 2 resources, essentially, because we need the pistol shot itself and the Go again on it. So it's essentially 2 resources for 2 points of value, up to 2 resources for 5 points of value if you have 3 purifiers as well. But it is very unlikely against a Dromai player that you'll be able to have the full 5 item setup along with having enough life total to make use of it, which is why I like to just run the 1 chamber and leave the one inside. Another thing to note about this is that if you start chamber and leave this inside, the Dromai player a lot of the time will assume that you have the additional chamber or chambers in the deck, and so they will play around the fact that you have endgame inevitability and that you can't deck out, which is not entirely true, but not entirely false either. Essentially, the purpose of this strategy is to kill the opponent before you run out of deck, but use fewer cards on your power turns, and increase the height of your power turns such that you have enough gas to control the board while presenting damage, while also having enough to finish off the opponent. So yeah, we're just going to be running 1 Induction Chamber into this matchup. Next up, the 3 Purifiers. We're going to put all of these in. It's really important, to me at least, that we have all 3 of them. And the reason for that is we're going to be boosting a reasonable amount in this matchup. Not doing it all the time, but we should never be left with a hand we're not allowed to do anything with. We're always going to be playing to value, because if you're not playing to value, you're just not going to win anyway. And so that being said, you're going to be doing some boosting, and if you boost away a purifier, it's going to suck. So you really need to aim to set these up as early as possible, because what they allow you to do is have a scenario where you'll have 2 to 3 purifiers set up, you'll have a high octane in arsenal, and the extra action points netted from high octane usually only accrue 2 points of value each in an aggressive matchup, whereas we can push that up when we have our purifiers all loaded anyway to generate 4 or 5 points of value per action point. So this is really the crux of what this deck is trying to do in this format. So that's why we really place much more emphasis on playing out a purifier than we do our induction chamber. So having your induction chamber to start, very important, but outside of that, we just want the power of the purifiers. Next up, we want the payloads in. They are poppers, and they're there for Dromai. Very simple. The D-Reacts, we do not want them whatsoever. As I said, we need to be able to boost, we need to keep up the pressure whilst also maintaining cards in our deck as much as possible. So we're going to leave the D-Reacts out for the time being. I've seen some people play Sink Below, which is fair. It stops your Kyloria breakpoint, Dust Up, Snatch, etc. But realistically, we want the consistency of our boosts. And if you miss a boost on a high octane turn, it is very bad. So we're going to leave those out for now. Over to the main board, we've got BIOS update. With our purifiers as well as our other blue items in deck, we're going to have a lot of potential hits for BIOS update. So I like to leave this in the matchup. But you really don't want to see it on your octane turn just because it's a red card that doesn't boost. So bear that in mind. But yeah, really quality card in this matchup specifically. Just if you hit that purifier off the top, it is such gas. Combustible Courier, I mean, enough said. Hits a dragon, gets your on hit, you can be very happy leaving this in Arsenal and waiting for a 4 health dragon like Mirror Guy or Themai to show up, just because of how good it is at dealing with that. We also run the blue copy, 3 blues, and again, just works really well in the matchup. On paper, looks pretty bad. At only a 2 for 2, it doesn't really do much. But, I mean, you can Goliath this one to deal with a 4 health dragon, or you can just use it straight to deal with an Ashwing and then come in with a 0 to 60 for 7, or deal with a Dromai or a Kyloria, for example. But again, it's still just a blue block 3 really quality card. High Octane. High Octane is the best card in this matchup, even better than any of the poppers, anything. It is the best. You really want to make sure that you have as many High Octanes in the end game as possible. So early game, if you see them, you either plonk it in Arsenal and wait until you have some Purifiers set up to have that really big turn, or you are just going to pitch it through. If you have to block with it because of a Kyloria or something like that, it's going to suck. But realistically, you should be able to find a way to pitch these whenever you have the chance to, because they are your win condition. If you banish them, there is a chance you can lose the game just on the spot. You really need it to close out the game. Next up, High Speed Impact. It's a 1 for 4, and realistically, on your High Octane turn, you want a lot of blue cards. So increasing the amount of reds in your deck by adding the Induction Chambers, the Payloads, and the Plasma Purifiers, you want to get rid of some of the worst reds in the deck. So we're going to be siding these out into the matchup. Poppers, leave Velocity in, leave Payload in, obviously. Pulse Wave, again, Pulse Wave is just a 1 for 4. When the effect triggers, it is really good, but I feel like in the Dromai matchup, you're not going to be boosting enough to where it's going to be relevant, or you're going to be aiming to make a weaker play or a less optimal play in order to get that third boost on the chain. It's also just 1 for 4, so one of the worst rates in your deck for a boost card. So we're going to be siding these out just because we don't really want to see them that often. Again, also just lowering the red count a bit so that we have the blues we need on our Octane turn to do what we need to do. T-Bone, 0 for 3. It's a good card. Totally happy to block with it. Totally happy to attack with it. Totally happy to kill an Azvalai or a 2 health dragon. Sometimes even just an Ashwing with this. Totally fine. One thing to note about T-Bone is sometimes Dromais will be running Seeker's Leggings in combination with Wave of Reality. Neither of these cards have a block value, i.e. you can't put those in front of T-Bone. So if they present the combination of Seeker's Leggings with Wave of Reality, your T-Bone is really powered up, because with 3 isolated T-Bones on separate combat chains, you can eat the entirety of their Furnace and their Crown of Providence. So bear that in mind if you see it come up, make the most of it. But that being said, if you're not taking their Furnace really early game, you don't want to be making a suboptimal play in order to make that happen. But yeah, be aware of that, and if it comes up, you'll be golden. Throttle, really good. It's a popper, first off, but also if you draw it in a hand where you can't get the value out of popping something with it because they just haven't played a popper, this is one of your best boost attacks as well. Do not be afraid to play this card to threaten damage, because leaving it in hand is more likely than not going to be the worst idea. So yeah, feel free to threaten damage with Throttle, but you can also decide to pitch it away like a Maximum Velocity or a Payload or something. 0 to 60, best card. Feel free to arsenal it to be ready for either a really good turn coming up, just to have that extra boost on the chain, or to save it to deal with a pesky dragon when it comes up. Often I'm arsenaling 0 to 60s just to have the extra attack ready in case they swarm the board with dragons. It's ready in Arsenal so that they play out a Mirror Guy and I can immediately just kill it. Same sort of deal with combustible, just not with the on hit, and it's cheaper. Zipper hit, same deal. Spark of Genius. Spark of Genius, you can really get value out of finding a purifier early game with Spark of Genius. The other thing Spark of Genius does is fetches a Teklo core. When you are setting up for your high octane turn, you really want to ideally have as many of your items loaded as possible. So 3 counters on your separate purifiers, a counter on your chamber, and ideally a counter on pistol, but don't give up that single pistol shot for 2 at the end of your previous turn to do that. That's just wasteful. So that being said, if you Spark of Genius to grab a Teklo core while you have your items loaded and Octane in arsenal, that should set you up quite nicely for the Octane turn coming up. And in that turn, depending on how many purifiers you have, you can deal upwards of 40 damage. So just have as many resources ready for that turn as you can. If you then don't draw the blues you need and boost cards you need in order to play that turn, feel free to just wait out, block out, and wait for the next turn. You really need the right hand for this. So yeah, Spark of Genius and Teklo Core can both allow that. 0 to 60, Zipper hit, yellow, same deal as their red counterparts. The blues, again, same deal. Blue T-Bone can deal with an Ashwing, can snipe a Furnace here and there. Blue Courier can trigger the on-hit, and the blue 0 to 60, etc. are just, for a blue, they are good attacks. The other thing to mention, Teklo Pounder, you are never really aiming to play a Teklo Pounder whatsoever. It is often the case that the +2 damage caused onto the first boost attack of a turn will get wasted, because often your first boost attack of the turn will be targeting a dragon and you've already got the damage ready to kill it. That being said, you can play in such a way such that Teklo Pounder can accrue you some value, but often it really doesn't do much for you. If you hit it off BIOS, that's great, but yeah, you're never aiming to play this card, and realistically, a shot for 2 reacting with Go again and then shooting for 2 by pitching the Teklo Pounder is probably better. But it's in our list because we have BIOS update, and it's in our list because we need the blues into the matchup. So yeah, that's how I dealt with Dromai over the weekend. Overall, over the weekend I went 2-1 into Dromai without my first loss of the day being in round 1. You can just have games where things just do not go your way and you just lose. And that's just the case with how this deck plays into Dromai. But that being said, it doesn't happen all the time. So my other 2 games against Dromai, one of them was streamed against Andy and Tronoku. Very nice player, incredible player from my locals. I just had what I needed relatively early. Just got a purifier out, got another purifier out, set up my Octane in arsenal. He had the perfect pressure and took me very low before I was able to swing the game. But just on that one turn, I ended up playing double high octane with 3 purifiers loaded and on the board. And I think I dealt just under 40 damage, or presented just under 40 damage, in order to win back tempo and eventually close out the game. Similarly, just before Top Cut, played against Hayden Dale, also on Dromai. Things just were okay. They didn't go incredibly, they didn't go terribly. But I got my purifiers, I got what I needed. I set up the high octane turn. An advantage of this deck is if they don't really expect what's coming, they can they will sort of play a different game plan and not play towards the fact that you have this super combo turn coming up. But that being said, it felt like Hayden was really switched on to what was going on. But yeah, I just managed to get there. Probably a little bit of luck in there. But yeah, round 1, just faced Remy Grasset on Dromai. And yeah, just had one turn where he played Tomultai and Kyloria. Attacked with Tomultai, revealed 2 reds. I didn't have a popper. Destroyed my Foundry Heart, dealt a bunch of damage. I blocked the Kyloria. I go to attack the Tomultai. Then I need to activate Foundry Heart to shoot the Tomultai the last time and shoot the Kyloria for the second time. Um, but then I realized I didn't have the Foundry Heart because of the Tonal Tie. And in that scenario, I ended up just killing the Tonal Tie, leaving the Kyloria to live until the next turn, which is essentially a death sentence. And the game was just downhill from there. And that sort of thing can just happen against Dromai. But luckily, managed to scrape it back and take out the win at the end of the day. So, yeah, but that's sort of my plan into Dromai. So, for a brief rundown of the day, first round, Remy Grasset, incredible player from Sydney on Dromai, just had the really incredible combo of Tonal Tie into Kyloria that I just couldn't deal with, and downhill from there. Thomas, again, great player from Sydney. They were on Lexi. I won the dice roll, decided to go second because going second into that matchup is really good. Just means you are allowed to threaten damage in the first instance instead of having to either threaten damage and then not have an arsenal so that they don't also get to load an arrow, or if you play a item, you then have no action point so that they're allowed to load on your turn and then start the game on a 5-card hand. So in that scenario, going second feels great. None of us had any particularly big turns, so it was just playing to value for the rest of the game, and I just got there. Matthew Horn, great player. Also, they were on Levia. Quite interesting. I haven't played against much Levia, in fact. But what I've learnt from my 2 matches over the weekend against Levia is that they have a few non-blocks in the deck that they can't realistically side out. So they can't have the game plan that Rhinar sometimes has, which is just ultra fatigue, just block out. If you leave them with an off turn, they'll play out an arc smash, get rid of your items, and just from there, just be able to fatigue you ultra easily. So with Levia, I found that they don't have that sort of issue. So we are able to just start Teclo Pounder and start slamming him. I tend to still have that extra chamber in my deck in case they do try to fatigue me, and then just crown it away if I see it and we're just racing. But realistically, you probably don't need to and can just expect a Levia to just try to race you. So yeah, had that matchup again. I think I went second and then was just trying to race the whole time, and yeah, just got there. Into the first draft. First draft was a bloodbath. I was in fact staying with Zach, Henry, and Scott in our room for our accommodation, and yeah, just this pod was some incredible players. Generally, how I like to play Monarch Draft is I will lean a little bit towards the heroes I like to play, which is essentially just not Levia. I would like to play Prism a little bit above all else, and then Bolton and Chain are a little bit under that. I enjoy both of those decks, and then I really just do not enjoy playing Levia, just because of the variance of it and the fact you can lose out of nowhere through no real fault of your own. So I opened my first pack. I'm pretty sure I first picked a red Spears of Sterility to send the signal down the line that I was on Prism. The person to my left, Roy Lai, picked up on it, and coming back on pack 2, I wasn't cut on Prism at all, which was good. After that, it turned out that the person to my right was also not really that interested in Prism. And from then on, I was just in the right seat for the Prism cards. I took quite a few good Red Heralds, as well as I like to draft a lot of blues in a Prism deck, just because I like to block out, keep a Spectral Shield available, and then swing with it with a blue for 4. So a lot of my draft Prism decks have a lot of generic 2-block blues in them, and just, yeah, had what I needed. I also was past like a Red Prismatic Shield, pick 4, pack 1, which just, yeah, really solidified me into that seat. So yeah, just had a bit of good luck in there, and just yeah had what I needed against Zach. His Levia deck wasn't incredible, so I was just able to set up a Spectral Shield and keep swinging with it. Pretty nice. Against Henry, he was the one of one chain in our deck, in our pod. I was quite scared of this deck, but I knew was just going to commit to my game plan, and have a chance of fatiguing this deck. What ended up happening was I had a Soul Shield. I think I got pack 3, pick 2, something like that. And the Soul Shield came in clutch in the end of the game. He came in with a reasonable turn, and I had a blue to pitch for Iron Hide and Soul Shield to block with 8 with 1 card from hand. And that just sealed the deal on it, and they just couldn't get enough damage through to win. And then Scott, he was this other Prism in the pod, so already if you're a 2 of Prism pod and you're a Prism, you're pretty happy. And Scott was the other Prism. So we played the Prism Mirror in the final. I won the dice roll, went second. On my second or third turn, I played out a red Prismatic, and I was just able to keep at least one of those shields for the entirety of the rest of the game up until the final turn, where I decided to take all the damage, create another shield, swing back with it, then play a phantasmified Enigma Chimera for 12 or something stupid. Prism Mirrors in draft are just silly sometimes if they don't have the go again required to deal with your auras. So yeah, that's how that game turned out. Sorry, Scott. Yeah, then on to draft 2. Draft 2 was wild. Let's just say that. I did the same thing that worked in my previous pod. I opened my pack, Arclight Sentinel, Parable of Humility, Red Herald, Popper. Okay, I don't know if I can cut off the Prism signal. Let's give it a try. I take the Arclight, and I'm gonna see what wheels. And from my right, I get past a Spears, and I'm like, okay, cool. They are not on Prism. I'll take the Spears, and then yeah, just going around, I am past a bunch of Heralds. It seems like nobody's on Prism somehow. So I get past just gas after gas after gas of Red Heralds. And yeah, the Parable ends up wheeling from my first pack, so I take that, so I have 2 auras from the same pack. And from that point on, I'm just taking Red Herald after Red Herald after Red Herald. Eventually in pack 3, I'm like, well, I'm the only Prism. This is nuts. And I'm actually prioritizing blue Heralds over the reds, just because I have too many reds at this point. The draft ends, and I have 30 playable Illusionist cards alongside a bunch of light cards and really good generics and stuff, and I'm just like, I don't know how this happened. So, yeah. Sorry, Zach. Sorry, Dev. Sorry, Will. But yeah, that's how that ended up. And then, yeah, day 2 started round 10 CC. Played against Farhad. Great player on Kano. Just blew me up. Great game. This one was on stream. I just kept attacking, and he kept blocking and blocking and blocking. Then one time I just don't have a great hand. I boost. I activate Foundry Heart to have more resources floating. I boost again. I play a Spark of Genius with a card left in hand, 2 resources floating. And the card left in my hand is Velocity, which is not ideal. But anyway, it is what it is. I play that, play the Spark, and I'm left with 2 resources and the card in hand. So essentially 3 resources floating, and I'm still at 40 life. He then rips a Wildfire off top, chucks a Ether Flare back to the top of the deck with Ragamuffin's Hat, rips a Blazing off top as well, and goes Wildfire, Flare, Blazing, for 42 damage, I think, through my AB3 on the Wildfire. Not much you can do there. Well played. Round 11, Hayden on Dromai. Again, I've gone through my Dromai plan. Just follow the steps. I'll probably go through a more detailed, or at least a gameplay idea of how you should be approaching this matchup. So I'll probably play a Talishar game or two to give you that little bit of demonstration. But yeah, it just went to plan, got my purifiers, set up my turn, had the Octane turn, etc. Went well. And then finally, Wesley, he was on Levia. He somehow played all 3 Blood Rushes in the first 4 turns. He also, on 2 of those turns, also had Beast Within in hand out of the 2 cards that were remaining in his hand. And I missed it both times. So that was pretty good for me. But yeah, 3 Blood Rushes, pretty tight game, but I managed to close it out with some Octane. I think there was a Velocity in there as well. Can't quite remember. But went second and just blasted. Then in the finals, we had Ryan Taylor from Adelaide on Bravo. Really good player, but I was highest standing. I chose to go first, and it was the most disgusting setup time you've ever seen. I started off by drew into my hand blue, red, Spark of Genius, unmovable. I spark for 4. I grab a induction chamber out and Arsenal the unmovable on turn 0. So I've got my unmovable ready in case they do anything good, and I also have my induction chamber out. On their turn, they go, I think it's Undominated Spinal and Arsenal a card. I block with 3 cards and then play out a Teklo Core. On my next turn, they do Rouse into Hammer, I believe. Something like that. Maybe it's Zealous. I don't know. But yeah, I block with a card on the Rouse and a card on the Hammer, leaving me with 2 cards in my hand. The 2 cards in my hand are both Purifiers, or at least 2 of my Purifiers. So I take a little bit of damage there in order to set up one of the Purifiers, leave one in hand. Next turn, again, I just block 9 with the rest of my hand and then set up the Purifier. So off of the 2 core charges, I set up both Purifiers, and I'm set up with my full setup, all I need with the 2 and 2 at 36 life. And the game is simply just over from there. I've got my unmovable, I've got all my Diriacs left in the deck. There's just no real win condition that you have at that point. So, sorry Ryan, but that's how the game goes sometimes. Semi-finals against Andy. Really, really tight match. I went first, got an item out, and was pretty happy with that. But Andy has played me a lot, knows exactly what to do to keep up the pressure. I had to take a lot of damage. I was expecting him to Arsenal a card at the end of a particular turn, and then after attacking with all his dragons, he's just like, Metamorph for 7, and I'm like, oh, okay. I take the Metamorph down to like 11 from 18 while he's still on 35, and I'm just like, I think I've lost this one. Next turn, I find what I need for my Octane turn, so I take the damage down to, I think, 6, 5, something like that. Like, I get pretty low in order to play this turn, and then I go use all my Purifiers, high octane, draw 2 cards, 2 boosts into 6 pistol shots for 5, presenting a total of 37 damage, something like that. With that, he blocks with most of his hand, lives at 11 with 1 card remaining, no dragons on field. But in that turn, I also banish my high octane, my 3rd high octane, so we know we can't resort to that. And what this means is I need to generate enough damage throughout the course of the game to kill him before I run out of deck, whilst also maintaining my life total. What ends up happening is, on his next 2 turns, he plays 2 Kylorias. The turn prior, I had activated Spark of Genius to shuffle my deck, and what that ended up doing is shuffling the poppers that I pitched early game back to somewhere around the top. And so on each of those 2 turns where he played Kyloria, I had the popper ready for it, dealt with it, and then presented more damage back to face. So yeah, those poppers coming at the right time because I shuffled my deck ended up sealing the deal for me. And then finally, back at it again, Fahad in the finals. We played round 10, we played in the quarterfinals last year. It's just a match. And he's higher seed. He chooses to go second. I simply load pistol and move to Arsenal. He plays a few spells on my turn, and I'm able to block it all, pitching a yellow and then a blue from my hand, and arsenaling a red courier. Next turn, he plays activates Crucible, red Aether Spindle for 5, and opt as much damage as is dealt. This is one of the spells which I always snap block. However, the hand I have drawn is Combustible Courier, 0 to 60, 0 to 60, a blue, and maximum velocity. What this hand tells me is that I can play Combustible Courier at the start of the turn for 8. Then, once I've played that, ideally what's going to happen is, because Courier has the on hit, he will block initially, because if he's going to block at all, he's going to block at the start. And from that, I am free to overextend in order to play the velocity, because I know he can't kill me with only 1 card in hand. So I take the Aether Spindle. It's quite greedy, but I feel like it's just what I have to do. He then brings off a Sonic Boom off the top after having opted perfectly. Sonic Boom off the top into another Aether Spindle, into another opt for 4 off the Aether Spindle. Just going to take it all. I've committed at this point. Then my turn, he draws into his next hand. I Goliath, play Courier for 8 off Teklo Pounder, pitching a blue, 1 float. He ends up blocking with 3 cards as I expected and as I really wanted to happen. If he doesn't block there and just has what he needs to win the game, I probably just lose. But realistically, by turn 2, it's unlikely, but they could have what they need. But yeah, he blocks 3. Blocks with 3 cards. Then I go 0 to 60, 0 to 60, activate Foundry, Velocity. The velocity is resource perfect, so I have no resources floating at the end of the turn, but it doesn't matter because he's blocked. From there, he goes down to 10 in the teens-ish, I think. And from there, I have to just be on top of the ball, just make sure I have resources remaining in my hand whenever I go to end the turn, if he has cards left in hand. Eventually, we get to a point where he's on 2. I have resources floating, and he has 4 cards in hand. He uses 2 cards in hand to bring off the top card of the deck. It's a blue spindle, so I'm like, alright, it's probably fine if I take at least most of this. So I leave 1 floating because it means once he takes this 2, goes to 2 off because I'm attacking with the pistol. He is unable to KO any further because with 2 cards in hand, if he uses any further cards in hand, I will have lethal on him by breaking Achilles, attacking with the last card in my hand, a yellow 0 to 60, into the pistol shot again. But how it ends up playing out is he has 2 cards remaining in his hand. So he would be able to block out that turn, and then I've gotten rid of my Arcane Barrier 1 on my boots. So I decide to pass the turn there. On his turn, he gets rid of the remaining card in his hand, a red Tome of Aetherwind, and plays out a energy potion. Turns out, had I broken my Achilles there, I would have won because the energy potion does not have a block value. Although he could have decided to Ragamuffins the Tome of Aetherwind to the top, play it out, and then draw some cards to block with, which is possible. But throwing Ragamuffins for that is pretty bad. But anyway, I decide to hold it out. Next turn, I draw into my 4-card hand, immediately play my arsenal of yellow 0 to 60. This forces him to go off, try to get what he needs to kill me, but when I have 4 cards in hand, it's pretty difficult to deal enough damage through all that. He He ends up playing Wildfire for 6. I block 3 with AB3 and a blue. He plays Lesson for another 6, I believe. Maybe it's 7. I pay for that with another blue from my hand, and then Blazing comes in for a lot less than the amount of life I have. And that's the game. Yeah, so that's essentially how my national championship went. It was very, very tight, and could have gone either way. But yeah, that's just how it ended up playing out. Dash is still a great deck, and I cannot wait for Bright Lights.